Hey everyone, Chris Carter here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I got Ray Fittipaldo. We're going to talk about all the free agent news that's happening, big players being cut, and who the Steelers should and shouldn't be going after in free agency as that opens up next week. We'll also talk about Ray's newest mock draft after the combine. What players is he prioritizing for the Steelers? We'll go over that and revisiting the running back question with a strong running back class and rumors that Naji Harris could be coming back. What's going to happen there? All here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Let's get into it. You are now listening to the North Shore Drive podcast, a show on all things Pittsburgh sports from the writers of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, hosted by Christopher Carter. Hello, and welcome to the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. I'm your host, Chris Carter, joined today by Ray Fittipaldo, one of our great Steelers beat writers. And as always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to this channel to get all of our Monday, Wednesday, Friday episodes of the North Shore Drive podcast, as well as our daily content that comes out from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. And as always, this show is brought to you by Edgar Snyder Associates. Edgar Snyder Associates, they do workers' compensation as well. If you've been hurt on the job, who decides when you're better? You decide when you're better. Who decides when your treatment is over? Who decides when your benefits are over? The answer might surprise you. Insurance companies, doctors do. And how does that make you feel? If the answer is not great, call Edgar Snyder Associates today for 1-800-94-EDGAR. They'll fight for the workers' comp rights you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. More on them later. Ray, let's talk about this free agent situation. The big names are starting to open up. You and I have talked about this and how every year everyone thinks they know what free agents look like and who's out there back in January and February. But it's not until March. It's not until this time of the year when we start to see teams start to say, okay, we're resigning on these guys, these big name guys. We're going to cut them, let them go, and they hit the free agency pool. And then that's when we get a bigger picture of who's actually available. And two big names have hit the market recently: Darius Slay, cornerback with the Eagles, Super Bowl champion, and Davante Adams, all-pro guy that was with the Jets. He's been with the Packers. Both those guys hitting the market. And, of course, a lot of people wondering, will the Steelers be going after those guys? And certainly they are interested in both of those positions, as cornerback and wide receiver are two priorities that you and I have been talking about. But, Ray, Darius Slay's 34. Davante Adams is 32.
Right.
I have this opinion. They might not be as all out to go get those guys versus some other guys. Where do you stand as far as what the Steelers' priority should be in free agency?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen the Steelers go down this road before. They did it just 2 years ago with Patrick Peterson, who was, as it turned out, to be past his prime. And then I think you might be going down a similar road if you do that with, Darius Slay. Chris, at some point, you just have to go spend big money and sign a guy who's 25, 26, that guy coming off the first contract. You have to invest. And I think the Steelers at some point will need to do that at cornerback. They might even have to do that, at receiver. So that's my take on it. Kind of see them do the same thing over and over again. It's worked with varying success. The one exception I might make, I would be a no on both Adams and Slay. The one exception I might make, just because he's played here, he knows the system, I would sign Javon Hargrave to a one-year deal. He's 32 years old. I would do that. You know how he fits in your defense. You know what type of player he is. But, these other guys coming from different teams, you're never really sure how they're going to fit in your system. And, I'd just rather see them maybe spend twice as much money, but maybe you end up hitting on a guy, maybe like they did last year with Patrick Queen.
Maybe. And I mean, part of this, too, is also positions, right? Because a 32 or 33-year-old at corner and wide receiver, that's a little different, right? Like those guys, their age is starting to fade from them, or their speed starting to fade for them. Their quickness might be a little bit slower. Right. But defensive linemen, when they get to the age that Hargrave's 32, right? When they get to that age, that's when they start hitting like their prime. That's when Cam Hayward, I mean, he was pretty good when he turned like 30, but that's when Cam Hayward, was further cementing who he was. I mean, heck, Cam's 36 now, and he's a first team All-Pro. So, I think a Javon Hargrave move makes a lot of sense if they want to get an older guy to be part of their rotation, who, again, like you said, he knows the system. He comes right in. He knows Cam Hayward, and he could be a guy that can help their high investment that we expect in the upcoming NFL draft at D tackle, and also help Keanu Benton. So I'm with you on that. I also think there are other guys out there that make a lot more sense. Like if you're going for a cornerback, instead of going for a Darius Slay, what about a Carlton Davis or Shavarius Ward? Those guys are 29 years old. You can get a few years, you can do 2-3 year deals with those guys. A guy like DJ Reed, that would make a lot of sense. Yeah. A guy like Byron Murphy, so guys that are either in their late 20s or like very early 30s. So I think that makes a lot more sense, than necessarily going after these big names, that guys that are older and probably only doing 1 year deals with.
Yeah, I mean, the Steelers, if you look at their cornerback position over the last 5 or 7 years, it seems like almost every year they're trying to bring in a free agent corner. Steven Nelson was signed to a 3-year deal. Mm-hmm. This is probably 5-6 years ago. I think he only plays out 2 years of that deal. He moves on. So it seems like it's almost an endless cycle. And I know Nelson was younger. I think Nelson maybe was coming off a first contract, or at the very least, he was in his, mid to late 20s. So there is a difference there when you're talking about guys like Slay. But, for me, Chris, just give me a younger guy coming off a first contract. If it's the difference between spending $8 million and $16 million, and maybe you got your partner for Joey Porter for the next few years, maybe that's worth it. But as you know, they also have D-line to address. Maybe they want to invest big in a guy like Milton Williams. They have receiver to address. Maybe they want to invest big in one of the names that's out there on the trade market or free agency. So there's some different directions they can go with that extra cap space, but they're not going to be able to spend crazy because they still have a quarterback to pay and TJ Watt to pay later this summer.
But I think it's the key thing is where do they spend that at? Because like you said, Javon Hargrave is an option there. Milton Williams is an option there. I like Tershawn Wharton, the defensive tackle out of the Kansas City Chiefs. He's 27 years old. Williams is 27 years old. That's the move I think that behooves the Steelers, is trying to get guys who you think can be really good veterans, play with your team in whatever position you're getting, but you're getting them for at least 2 to 3 years in a younger stage. You're not getting them at the twilight of their career where they're just trying to find a couple more hurrahs, and again, like it'd be different. It was different with Patrick Peterson, right? Because the Steelers, their salary cap situation was a little bit tighter, and they had to kind of make selective decisions, and so you got Peterson for that didn't crush you. Whereas like if you go get Davante Adams is probably going to command some big dollars on the open market still, even though he's older, and that's where I think that does that help you as much, or does getting a guy that can be part of what you're trying to build on either side of the ball for a few more years, is that the priority? So there's options out there. And again, we're recording this Tuesday afternoon. So like this could get even crazier by tomorrow. There could be a whole other set of cuts that adds to it. But the point is I think Steelers fans just need to relax, need to step back and just realize that like this is a longer process, and that I think the Steelers just need to keep working their way towards keeping their eyes on the ball, and then we'll get to see what position are they prioritizing in free agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And Oma Khan said it at the Combine, Chris. Someone asked, how busy they'll be in free agency, and he said it's probably going to be like the last couple of years. So if you just go back and look, they spent good money on Queen. I thought they got a bargain on Deshaun Elliott, and obviously a bargain on Russell Wilson. So right there, you add it all up. Queen was about 40, Russell 41, and then Deshaun. They spent almost 45-50 million in free agency last year on 3 guys. I would expect a similar number this year, if not more, because that salary cap went up last week by 24 million. So you might even see them spend 55-60 million in free agency this season.
I think that's something that would make a lot of sense with the cap space that they have available to them right now, and the fact that the main people that they're signing to keep around is their quarterback. Do they keep Justin Fields? Do they keep Russell Wilson? We've talked a lot about that. That's something that we'll keep an eye on, as we keep an eye on a lot of things. We got to take a quick break. When we come back, Ray Fittipaldo has made his post-combine mock draft for the Steelers. who he's prioritizing, who he thinks is the fits. We'll talk about his picks and break them down step by step next here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. But first, I want to remind you, Edgar Snyder Associates is our great sponsor here, and they do great work in workers' compensation. If you've ever been hurt on the job and you wonder who decides if you're better, it's always the insurance company's doctors, whether it's about when your treatment's over, whether your benefits are over, it's always your insurance company's doctor. And if that makes you feel not great, you're not alone, because Edgar Snyder Associates has been helping people deal with workers' comp situations for years now. And that you can call them today to help them with your workers' compensation situation with 1-800-94-EDGAR. Make sure you do so, because they'll fight for the workers' comp rights that you deserve. And remember, there's never a fee unless they get money for you. Back here on the North Shore Drive podcast for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about your mock draft here. You submitted this, and you guys can read this at post-gazette.com to get his full breakdown and to go step by step. But Ray, this is your second mock, I believe, of the offseason. You always do one before the combine, then one after, adjusting for what's been happening to weigh other options here. But you stayed with the D-line early on. The Steelers going and getting a big man. Break down your first round pick here, Derrick Harmon out of Oregon.
Yeah, sort of the theme of this one, Chris, is, you look at other mock drafts, and everyone wants the Steelers to draft a quarterback in the first round or a receiver. Field Yates, I think it was last week, a couple of weeks ago, Jackson Dart. Now it's Emeka Egbuka or Matthew Golden. And listen, I get it. The Steelers' offense is in dire need of playmakers, but I can make the argument, and I think some other people would as well, that they're not going to compete for anything in 2025 if that defense is as shoddy as it was late in the season, giving up 300 yards rushing in the playoff game, giving up 27 points or more in 4 of the final 7 games. I mean, Chris, it was disastrous. So to me, as long as you're built around your defense, and they continue to be, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, there is still a team, Alex Highsmith, that is built around the defense. And until they're not, I think they have to continue to fortify that position. So for me, number 21, this guy had a great combine, tested really well. Derrick Harmon out of Oregon, spent his first 3 seasons at Michigan State. Chris, 315 pounds. He ran a 4.95 40. Just a really good combine for him. And, I think if you look at his production at both Michigan State and Oregon there, he's a really good player.
Yeah, let's just say I never want a guy that size moving that fast chasing me. That's just insane.
Yeah.
But in all seriousness, we talked with Derrick Harmon at the combine. He talked about how he idolizes Cam Hayward and Chris Jones, and those are 2 guys with his build that he thinks he wants to play like. He even talked about how Cam Hayward snatches people's wrists to try to knock them off balance and things like that. Those types of things, those things matter to the Steelers. I really like the Derrick Harmon pick, but you doubled down. And, whereas some people, like I've been doubling down whenever I mess around with a mock, I'm like, I'll go D-line again in the 4th round for the Steelers. Yeah. You did it in the 2nd round. You went and got Alfred Collins, big defensive lineman out of Texas. What was behind that move?
So for me, Derrick Harmon, Cam Hayward's replacement whenever Cam moves on. Now, Harmon has flexibility. He can move down, play 3 technique. He'll help you out as a rookie, but eventually he's going to be Cam Hayward's replacement. Chris, this draft is so deep with defensive tackles in the middle that you get a guy like Alfred Collins. He's going to help you run defense right away as well. Now, he's got some flexibility too. He can move out and play any position on the line, but whenever you got to get a guy who's 6'6", 330 pounds like he is, to me, you plug him into the middle and base, bump out Keanu Benton to the 3 technique to replace Larry Ogunjobi, and boom, all of a sudden you got a more formidable defensive line. You might have to do that in the first 2 rounds if you want to be really good next year. I'm not telling you can't do it in the 3rd, 4th round. You certainly could. Guys like Jamari Caldwell from Oregon might be there in that range. Jordan Phillips from Maryland might be there in that range. You could certainly do that. But to me, Alfred Collins has a chance to be a really good player. Really like what I saw of him on tape. So that was my pick.
I feel you on that. Listen, if they got those 2 guys, D-line would be solidified for years to come, in my opinion, as long as you get, because then you'd have those two and Benton as part of your youth movement. And then if you sign Hargrave, like you're talking about, you throw those guys with Cam Hayward, your D-line's solid. You don't have to really invest big in that again for some time, and that opens up the opportunity to try and go and get those skill players in the coming years, kind of a lot like how the Philadelphia Eagles built their current roster, which is, again, why we keep talking about those positions. But let's keep it moving here, because you got several other picks. Round 3, that's where you go get a wide receiver. You go get Iowa State receiver Jaylin Noel, who we now know is going to be a top 30 visit for the Steelers. He ran a 4.39. Yeah. He was a team captain for the Cyclones. What did you see out of him, and why did you like him in the third?
Yeah, I mean, I went back and forth. There were several receivers who are going to be in that second, third round range. And you got some big body types, guys who are like 6'4", 210, like a guy like his teammate at Iowa State, Jaden Higgins. He's a bigger body. I toyed with the idea of putting him in there at number 83. All that matters is you got to find somebody who complements that offense. I went with Noel just because he's a speed demon. I think this offense was in desperate need of some speed last season at times. We're going to talk about Naji Harris last segment, but just for me, Chris, too many plotters, on that offense last year, right? I mean, they needed an injection of speed and athleticism. A guy like Noel, you mentioned at 4.39 40, really good after the catch too. I think that's what it probably excites me most. Would be a nice compliment to George Pickens if they keep him, but regardless, that guy can be a piece for you for at least the next 4 seasons, going down the road.
Absolutely. Let's run through these next picks here. No, in fact, there's these next two I want to spend a second on it too. Will Howard is your 4th round pick. There's your quarterback pick for the Steelers, adding a young guy. Will Howard, you nailed it with this meet. I love Will Howard. He's my sweet spot quarterback in this draft class. I don't think he's the future guy, but I think he's a future potential like Mason Rudolph. Like, hey, in a pinch, he could come in, be the guy for you. He makes some big time throws. He has the right kind of build. I like the look of Will Howard. Why do you like the look of Will Howard?
Yeah, I mean, listen, you have to fill out the quarterback room. It's a very important position, whether he's a starter or a backup. And Chris, until you have your franchise quarterback, just keep picking guys mid-rounds, take a flyer on guys, see if they work out. You never, ever know. I mean, the chances decrease as you go from round to round. We all know that, but Howard is a big guy. I think he's 6'4", 236, tough in the pocket, has a little bit of mobility. He's not a statue back there. He can escape pressure. He's not going to be a guy who lights it up as a runner, but I think he's good enough to move around the pocket and maybe make some things happen, maybe run 3 to 5 yards for a first down. So for me, probably wouldn't take a guy like that earlier than the 4th round, but to me, first pick on day 3, why not take a shot?
I like that idea. Moving forward, you picked a guy that I've actually had the chance to cover in that it was Brashard Smith, SMU running back. Listen, he destroyed Pitt this year with the way that he was able to run the ball with his speed. And you note this in your notes. He's a former receiver, so he has that extra burst. He has the ability to catch the ball in space and make things happen. I like the idea of this pick, getting your running back in the 5th round to give you multiple options.
Yeah, and just the dual threat kind of intrigues me in Arthur Smith's offense, right? A guy who has receiving skills, he's going to be a weapon out of the backfield. But, Chris, you look at his numbers for a first-year running back to get over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. I'm sure there was a transition period there for him. So for him to do that in his first year, switching teams, switching conferences, very impressive. I think there might be more potential to tap there. Listen, again, 5th round, it's not a big gamble. If you hit on it, you're a genius.
Absolutely. Then rounding out just quick here on your 7th round picks, you go with the Steelers have 3 of them. Jaylen Reed, safety out of Penn State, Jermari Harris, Iowa cornerback, and Xavier Truss, Georgia offensive lineman. What was there behind the ideas of getting those guys and specifically those positions?
I mean, you need depth at safety. You're set with the starters, but you do need to replenish your depth there. Same with offensive line. They don't have a swing tackle. Probably going to bring back Nate Herbig as your top swing guy inside, but you need bodies there. Somebody to maybe compete with Dylan Cook for a swing tackle job. And then corner, I thought maybe I could have addressed that earlier, but I'm thinking just go get a corner in free agency. Maybe get one on day 3. I think that's maybe the route to go. They just haven't had a ton of success drafting corners, I couldn't really find a guy I like on day 2 or day 3. So, I took Jermari with one of those 7s.
I hear you there. There you have it. Ray's full 7th round post-combine Steelers mock draft, mock draft 2.0 for Ray. If you want to read about it and look at it and comment on it, be sure to do so in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, Post-Gazette.com. We're going to come back when we do. I want to talk about this running back class and how it relates to what the Steelers might do at running back with what their roster might be heading into the draft, including Naji Harris, who we've heard a little bit about. Maybe the Steelers are interested in bringing him back. We'll talk about that next year on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But first, we'll remind you this show is also brought to you by Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. They're your mesothelioma and asbestos lawyers with over 85 years of experience. Call them today for a free consultation. That's Savinas, Kane, and Gallucci. We're also brought to you by Moon Township Honda, where you can get your new Honda vehicle at 5802 University Boulevard in Moon Township, PA, or visit their website at moonhonda.com. Here's a message from our friends at Moon Township Honda.
We gave the all-electric Prologue EX class-leading passenger space. And we made its tech intuitive with Google built-in. Perhaps that's why we were named Best Overall EV and Hybrid Brand by Kelley Blue Book. It's nice when a dream comes together. Buy online, reserve from select dealers, or visit your local Honda dealer today.
We're back here on the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Chris Carter, Ray Fittipaldo. Ray, let's talk about the running back situation for the Steelers. Naji Harris, of course, set to be a free agent right now. We've talked with Jerry Dulac. You've talked about this when we were at the Combine, that how Naji Harris's agents were still in contact with the Steelers, talking about the potential of working a deal out and what could happen there. But one thing that happened too was that when you look at some other news that happened on Tuesday, when it came to the running back situation, Saquon Barkley just got paid, and he got paid to the tune of a 2-year extension with $41.2 million in new money, $36 million of that guaranteed. That is huge money to throw at a running back, and rightfully so. Saquon Barkley, the best running back in the league. Big reason why the Eagles were a Super Bowl champion this year. Such a big part of what makes them. But at the same time, whereas Naji Harris isn't on Saquon Barkley's level, that impacts the running back market. And to me, I think that if you're the Steelers, again, if they had been able to if they had just chosen to bring Naji Harris back on a $6.7 million 5th-year extension, that would have made sense. But now you're probably looking at Naji Harris above making probably $10 to plus million a year, and that I have a hard time seeing Oma Khan committing to.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chris. I think in some ways it is, you set a new market. I think theoretically all the other running backs beneath you will benefit. But you and I have talked about this a lot. It's a great year for running backs in this draft. I mean, I think it was different last year. You saw all kinds of guys get paid in free agency. I'm not totally convinced that's going to be the case again this year, just because of that depth in this class. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. The one takeaway from all this is, if you're a team like the Eagles and you hit it right with all your moves, and then you add that last piece as a running back, boy, you could really improve your team. And I'm happy for Saquon, first running back ever over $20 million a year. He deserves it. I just don't know if every team can take that same approach. I mean, he might be at that number for a while with nobody approaching him, just given, the state of, this draft class coming up. I mean, there's some special players, coming up here, and all these guys are going to have to find homes. I'm going to be interested to see how it affects Harris and some of these other free agents. I'm just, like I said, I'm not convinced that it's going to be a boon for them. That's all.
Now, here's the thing: is that if he doesn't get to capitalize on it, then that may be what brings him back to Pittsburgh, right? Yeah. Like if he doesn't get $10 million to the Steelers, then get him for 7 or 8, and they say, hey, here's a 2-year deal. Bring Naji Harris back, then still draft a running back, and then you have an option. You're saying, hey, you know what? If that guy's better, guess what? That becomes the guy. If he's not better, you have Naji Harris and Jaylen Warren all over again, and you have options there. And I see your point there. But this is an intriguing class at running back. And I'm not even talking about the top guys. Ashton Jeanty, of course, as everyone wants to talk about. Not only do I not think he's there when the Steelers pick, I don't think the Steelers would be – I think if he was there and the Steelers – had like Kenneth Grant or Derrick Harmon as the pick there. Not only would I think they would take that defensive tackle, I think they'd even trade back with, say, like a team like, I don't know, like, well, Green Bay has Josh Jacobs. They wouldn't do it. But a team that's like right beneath them that would say, hey, we want that guy. We'll give you a fourth to move up to go get him. I think the Steelers might do that. I also would say the same thing about Omari and Hampton. I'm not a big Cam Scatterbo person, but I think that the sweet spot starts happening in that second round, maybe even more in the third round when you start looking at Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, Quinshon Judkins out of Ohio State, as well as Trevion Henderson out of Ohio State. I also like Devin Neal. Jadon Blue ran a great 40-yard time. You picked just Brashard Smith in the fifth. I think an unsung guy that should get more praise is Damian Martinez out of Miami. But I just named like 6 or 7 guys. Yeah. I think all of those guys are potential future starters with their abilities coming in this draft class.
And the beauty about running back, Chris, is you can draft one 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round undrafted free agent. Those guys can be plug and play. Like there's not a whole thing about got to learn the playbook. Just hand them the ball. They know what to do. That's the beauty of needing a running back. A lot of times you worry about transitions with receivers, offensive linemen, more difficult positions. Let's say running back isn't difficult. It very much is, but it's a position where you can just sort of plug and play a guy just because the position doesn't change much from high school to college to the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's certainly a very good point there. And that's why, I think that's why running back somewhat has become less and less of a prioritized position when it comes in the draft, because, it is more plug and play, and that there's things to that there. And also the shelf life of running backs as well. I also wonder if the Steelers do what you kind of did in your mock draft and wait even later in this draft class to get the right guy, because you think back to Jaylen Warren. I talked with Eddie Faulkner once, and I remember he told me, I asked him about Jaylen Warren, and he was like, we thought he was the 7th best running back in his draft. Yet they didn't pick him because they were confident other teams wouldn't see what they saw in him. And now Jaylen Warren's an undrafted free agent who's been rocking for the Steelers as their number 2 option. Maybe he's their number 1 option this year. Yeah. That worked out for them. I could see them doing a similar thing, not waiting until they're undrafted, but saying, hey, you know what? You go and get Cam Scatterbo in the 2nd round, and you go get Caleb Johnson in the 2nd round. Yeah. They could wind up with a Jadon Blue or Damian Martinez or a Brashard Smith in the 4th or the 5th round and be very happy with that.
And who does that usually happen to? Smaller guys. 5'8", maybe a little bit undersized, underweight, but look at a guy like Warren. I know there's been a few injuries here or there, but Chris, for his size, the way he runs, the way he gets after it in pass protection, to me, I mean, it's to get as much out of him that they've already gotten. I think it's a plus. So, those smaller guys are the guys who are going to be around late in the draft, undrafted free agents, and there are plenty of those guys in this draft. There's some big backs you mentioned, Caleb Johnson, some other ones. You can get running backs of any shape and size in this draft. But, I hope those small guys go early, but usually, they're falling in the draft, and there's some good ones the Steelers can get later in the draft, or as you mentioned, even in undrafted free agency.
Certainly are plenty of players to pick through. We keep breaking them down here as we get closer to the draft season here on the North Shore Drive podcast. But with free agency around the corner, still a lot to talk about. Who else is going to get cut? Will the Steelers make some cuts very soon? We'll find all of that out as we keep going and get all your opinions here, get all your insight here on the North Shore Drive podcast and with our writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Thank you, Ray, for joining me, and thank you all for joining me as well here in the North Shore Drive podcast. Again, I'm your host, Chris Carter. Read all of our work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, and find this show every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get those episodes, as well as all the daily content that comes from all of our sports writers here at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Back Friday with more here on the Steelers on the North Shore Drive podcast. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the North Shore Drive podcast from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all the sports coverage from the Post-Gazette that we have to offer, visit post-gazette.com.